Days of mourning continue as Iran faces a future without two pivotal leaders. After President Ibrahim Raisi and Foreign Minister Amir Abdollahian were killed in a helicopter crash, government loyalists have gathered to mourn their loss. But will this tragic event lead to any change in the Islamic Republic? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's Newsmaker is Iran. The sudden deaths of Iran's president, foreign minister, and 6 other officials has highlighted great divides in Iranian society. On the streets around the country, mourners have come out in force to pay their respect and honor those lost, especially their president. Raisi was a hardline conservative, elected in 2021 among the lowest voter turnout in Iran's history. While he reflected some Iranians' desire to remain committed to the conservative principles of their revolution, others will remember him for far more controversial leadership. Here's a look.
On Sunday, the helicopter carrying President Ibrahim Raisi and Foreign Minister Hossein Amir Abdollahian and 6 others crashed in the country's East Azerbaijan province. They were on their way back from a dam opening on the Azerbaijani border. The helicopter went down in a mountainous region shrouded in heavy fog and without sending a mayday call.
سید ابراهیم رئیسی رئیس جمهور اسلامی ایران در راه خدمت به مردم به درجه رفیع شهادت رسید.
On Wednesday, prayers were held in Tehran, led by the Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei, ahead of Raisi's funeral in Mashhad.
We have lost an outstanding individual. The president was a very good brother, a responsible, efficient, competent, sincere, and determined individual.
In line with the Iranian constitution, Khamenei appointed first Vice President Mohammad Marandi as acting president, with the country set to go to the polls on the 28th of June to elect a new president. The vote won't be much different than the previous ones. The powerful Guardian's Council must approve all the candidates.
I don't believe that they're going to pick a shadowy figure that doesn't have a huge amount of name recognition to fill such an important post. They're going to find someone that can maintain ideological legitimacy and protect the system.
Raisi was that person. He had long been seen as a potential successor to Khamenei.
On key issues that the West cares about, that the Iranian opposition cares about, since issues like forcing the hijab on women and so forth, the nuclear program, Iran's regional agenda, none of those things, in my expectation, will be changing anytime soon.
While the cause of the helicopter crash remains unclear, the country's military chief has ordered a high-ranking committee to launch an investigation. But some blame the US sanctions that have banned the sale of aircraft and aviation parts to Iran. The country's fleet is one of the oldest in the world. Even the US-made Bell 212 helicopter carrying Raisi was decades old. But the US State Department has defended the sanctions, saying Iran uses its aircraft to support terrorism, and added that Washington is in no way going to apologize.
Ultimately, it's the Iranian government that is responsible for the decision to fly a 45-year-old helicopter in what was described as poor weather conditions, not any other actor.
Within Iran, Raisi was a divisive figure. In some sectors of society, his death was celebrated. But while his passing is a blow to the country's succession plans, few believe the status quo will change. Iran's supreme leader and his Guardian Council will approve the next president, as they have done for the past 45 years.
Let's get some perspective now from Tehran. And joining me is Mohammad Marandi. He's a government advisor and a professor of English literature and Orientalism at Tehran University. Thank you so much for being with us, and very sorry for your loss. Now, you've been speaking, Professor Marandi, to a lot of media outlets, in large part saying how wrong you think the analysis has been in the wake of your president's death. For example, we heard almost immediately that this marked a, quote, uncertain future for Iran. And you've reiterated that that is not the case at all. How so?
Well, because the Constitution is more than capable of solving these sort of problems. We already had a president and his prime minister. In the old Constitution, we had a prime minister. They were murdered by the MEK terror organization, which, by the way, has offices across Europe, and they have a major base in Albania. And immediately afterwards, we had elections in accordance with the Constitution, and a new president came to power, and so did a new prime minister. And that was during the war when Iran was under siege. Today, Iran is much more powerful. The institutions of the state are much more powerful as well. And the Constitution will allow us to, within weeks, have a new president, and the state will continue to function as normal.
With continuity. You've also indicated that you think too much has been made of the fact that Raisi was talked about as being a successor to the supreme leader, but you say he was actually one of many potential successors, and that it's the media's narrative in the West especially that as if this is putting Iran into greater turmoil because the successor to the supreme leader has been lost. And you say, again, that's not the case.
Yes, there was never any talk about him being the next leader. There was speculation in the public sphere about many people. There continues to be speculation. The leader is very healthy, but in the years ahead, there is a constitutional council or a constitutional body, a council of experts, which is their job is to choose a leader and to remove a leader if necessary. And they will do their job when the time comes. Mr. Raisi, if he was a candidate, he wouldn't have stood for presidency. He was popular as the head of the judiciary. He was known as an anti-corruption figure. When you become the president, especially in Iran, when you have sanctions and you have so many antagonists coming from Europe and North America, it's a very tough job. It doesn't necessarily make you more popular.
Okay. You know, there's also, of course, an investigation into the cause of this crash, and Iranian officials have actually indicated that weather conditions, including horrible fog, are a likely possible reason, I should say. So how important is it, do you think, for people to reserve judgment right now and wait for the official investigation to be complete? Because we're already hearing a lot of kind of conspiracy theories swirling and people being blamed when investigators have only just gotten to the ground.
I think it is very important, and to a large degree, I think people have shown patience. There is good reason to believe that this was an accident because of the sudden change in weather, the heavy fog, the heavy rain, as you alluded to, and the terrain. It was a forest, mountainous. But we still have to reserve judgment. We'll wait for the experts to find out what happened. The helicopter was also very old. The President Raisi does not have a presidential helicopter. So there are many questions. They all may have legitimate answers, but we'll have to wait and see.
Right.
But the circumstantial evidence does seem to indicate that it's quite plausible or quite possible, or that it was probably an accident. At this stage, that's what I believe.
So now Iran moves forward. You will head towards election in June. Now, when President Raisi was elected, we remember that Iran saw, abysmally low voter turnout. And that was a bit painful for Iran because you usually had much more participation in your democracy. What will you say if, again, this election brings, less than 50% turnout and you see people kind of equally disillusioned with their system in place and they don't turn out to vote again?
I don't recall the turnout 3 years ago. I think it was roughly 51%. And that was, if not the lowest, one of the two lowest turnouts for presidential elections. And that was because Dr. Larijani was disqualified by the Guardian Council. The leader criticized that. But there is no doubt that there is a high degree of legitimacy among people for the Islamic Republic of Iran. Iran's antagonists over the last 2 to 3 days have been saying that people have been celebrating. Western media has been showing pictures of 3 or 4 people here and there, usually outside Iran, celebrating and saying that Iranians are all happy, or showing social media memes. But I think the scenes in Tabriz yesterday, where hundreds of thousands came to the streets for the funeral there. That's where the helicopter was heading when it crashed. Then they moved the president and his companions to Qom. They also had a huge funeral there last night. And this morning in Tehran was massive. There were millions of people in Tehran, and I think anyone who looks at the footage will see that it was truly amazing. I remember when General Soleimani was a commander years ago, the West said the same thing, how he was despised and hated by Iranians and Iraqis. And when he was murdered in Baghdad, the funerals in Iraq began with huge numbers of people, and then it culminated in Iran, where you had millions of people. So the West always miscalculates with Iran, and it's because they have these so-called Iran experts who mislead them due to their ignorance and arrogance.
Okay, Professor Marandi, we're going to have to leave it there, unfortunately. I'd like to thank you so much for being with us on the Newsmakers.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, let's broaden out the discussion. And joining me now to debate a post-Raisi future for Iran are from New York, non-resident fellow at the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft, Amir Handjani. From Tehran, co-host of Twice Told Tales podcast and a researcher at the University of Tehran, Setareh Sadeqi. And from Doha, Iran project director at Crisis Group, Ali Vaez. Amir, I will start with you. You heard the sentiments there of Professor Marandi in Tehran, obviously a big Raisi supporter. Is there anything you disagree with in his analysis after what's happened?
Oh, yes. Since President Raisi's election and successive elections, there's a crisis of legitimacy for the Islamic Republic because you've had such low voter turnout. You've had a lot of dissatisfaction amongst the Iranian population. And because the Guardian Council essentially selects who is going to run for office, and their selection has tended to lean more and more hardline for candidates of Raisi's ilks. The reformers have been cut out. People like Ali Larijani have been cut out. So it's the people and the candidates that are slated for these elections are people that the Iranian population don't seem to get behind because they don't show up to the ballot box to vote for them.
Okay, but one of the points that he was making is that no matter what outsiders, and he considers the diaspora as well, just considers them general outsiders, that there will be continuity. And that he feels many Iranians just want that because the system is set up in a very effective way that means even in this tragic case where they lose leaders like this, suddenly there will be continuity and Iran will continue as per normal. Do you disagree with that?
No, I don't. I think he's right. There will be continuity because you're going to get candidates like Raisi, like his ilk, with his mindset. You know, Raisi was a hardliner's hardliner. And it's very clear that the system right now is producing and getting behind hardline candidates for prime positions like the presidency, like the Speaker of the Parliament. There's no room in the Iranian body politic for reformers or anyone whose views differ more than slightly from the supreme leaders or the IRGC. Those are who the system is getting behind.
Let me ask Setareh if you think that's true. Or is the continuity that Professor Marandi was speaking of actually just welcome and acceptable in what you see as a democracy?
Well, I think both Professor Marandi and your other expert made the correct point that the vetting system was one of the factors to blame on the low turnout that we had and we experienced 3 years ago for the presidential election. And there were a number of candidates that were, or a number of people who were running for candidacy and they were cut out of the election, and that created a lot of dissatisfaction, and that's why we witnessed the historic low turnout. But we also need to understand that people refrained from, or a large portion of the population, the eligible population, did not vote because they wanted to send a message to the establishment that they do not agree with the vetting process. And I believe that and I hope that the vetting system and the Guardian Council and the establishment has received that message, but they continue to support the general establishment, the general idea of the Islamic Revolution and the Islamic Republic. And I'm saying that because of the evidence that we see of the public support that exists for high or senior officials of Iran, for example, as we see, and as not just the images and the aerial footages show us of how popular, for example, the General Soleimani was, but or how popular, or at least his funeral was attended by millions and millions of Iranian in Tehran and in Tabriz, and we're going to see even more people coming in Mashhad because that's where he comes from. But it's also polls by, for example, the University of Maryland that show that the general establishment, even IRGC's activities, especially outside Iran, still enjoy a very high popularity. So the system is going to function normal. We're going to see, and I believe that we're going to expect higher voter turnout on June 28th because people think that they want to, declare allegiance to the establishment and show that they, with all the dissatisfactions and grievances that they have, they still want to support the general or the overall establishment.
It will be, something to keenly watch, the voter turnout in the following election, because it will say a lot about where Iranians do stand. But Ali, if I can move on to something different with you. As we were saying earlier, an investigation into the cause of this crash is underway, but the Iranian officials have said it's very possible that weather conditions are to blame. So do you think, especially after the assassination of Qasem Soleimani, was a bit of a relief to hear officials say that, because some suspected there would be attempts on other Iranian leaders which could lead to serious consequences, if not war, if that had been the suspicion?
Look, first of all, let me say I disagree with the fact that the Iranian people are seeking to perpetuate the status quo. Let's remember that Iran experienced massive protests 2 years ago that shook the system to its core. Even Islamic Republic's own surveys demonstrate that 85% of the population are dissatisfied with status quo. I think the Islamic Republic has real expertise in organizing funerals, and in order to showcase exactly what your previous guest was mentioning, that it has support at home. And also to dissuade its enemies abroad from thinking about undermining it. But these images could be deceiving, really, and I wouldn't buy too much into it. I would look at the results of the participation rate at the parliamentary runoff elections just last week, which in Tehran only 8% showed up to the polls. And to answer your question, look, I think if you look at the circumstances of this accident, it does make a lot of sense that it was an accident. A 50-year-old Bell helicopter in a stormy weather is not necessarily a good combination. And Iran has very tragic and low quality of aviation safety, partly as a result of U.S. sanctions, which has deprived the country from being able to upgrade and update its fleet. And so there are air accidents that happen in Iran all the time. If there was any possibility of foul play, I don't think the Iranian system would actually want to acknowledge it, because that would necessitate a response that I think it would be extremely costly for Iran. Even when you saw that Iran took the perilous step against Israel last month, they were hoping that they would draw a line under it very quickly, and it would not escalate into anything further. Plus, if indeed Israel or any other adversary was able to take out the president and the foreign minister at the same time, it basically would show that the Islamic Republic cannot even protect itself.
Interesting observation. Amir, let me come back to you, because I'd like to look, if we can, at the international reaction to these deaths. In Pakistan and India, for example, there was a full day of mourning declared. Others didn't go as far, obviously, but it was mostly quite respectful. Condolences were sent, and that matters. It matters, does it not, that nothing provocative was said?
Yes, I mean, when Joseph Stalin died, Dwight Eisenhower and the U.S. government sent condolences to Russia. But it was there were from the U.S. perspective, I think that's where you're getting at. It was very muted. The countries that are Iran's neighbors, such as India, Pakistan, Turkey, which have more cordial relations with Iran, express more sympathy. But other countries in the West have an eye toward the Iranian people, and as Ali has said, quite correctly in my estimation, President Raisi was deeply unpopular with a large portion of the Iranian public. Was remembered for atrocities in the 1980s, and therefore the reason why the international community was more muted in its condolences is because they have an eye toward the Iranian people and their views of President Raisi.
Okay, Setareh, I know your stance kind of differs on how people really feel about this loss. And it truly is symbolic of a polarized society, which is not just the case in Iran. We're seeing this in countries across the world right now. But I want to ask you about his leadership and what was potentially lost here. What are the implications now for not just Iran, but the wider region, not least towards the war in Gaza? Does anything change without Raisi in power?
Well, I think my stance and my viewpoint differ from your other two guests, not only because there is a variety of opinions inside Iran, as you've called it, maybe a polarized society, but also because, unlike your two other guests, I live in Iran. I have lived all my life in Iran, and today I was among these people who were mourning the death of their president and their foreign minister and other officials. I did not actually vote for President Raisi. I was not supportive of some of his policies, but he was regarded as a very honest man. He was actually, when he was the head of the judiciary system, he was hailed as a hero because he fought corruption. And that's something that you would hear from lawyers and people active in the judiciary system, even though they were not, for example, they would not vote for him as a president. So his legacy is not the legacy of one person. It's the legacy of a system of decision making, what differences that he had, for example, from the reformist. And I try to use more objective terms to describe the different political ideas and parties that exist in Iran, rather than using the words like hardliners or moderates, because they have the political parties have their names, and it's more than just calling them hardliners and moderate. It's the power dynamic in Iran is more complicated than just simplifying it into two fronts. So I think the general policies with regards to Iran's foreign policy, Iran's support for Palestine, will not change, as they have not changed over the past decades. And what will change is, depending on who is going to win the next election, is probably the economic policies and policies regarding, like in foreign policies. The part that will kind of change is how much again, depending on who is going to win the election, on how much Iran would look towards West or towards East, or like how the alliances that it's going to form with regional allies or outside. But as you can see, the overall policies are not going to have to view major change.
Fair enough. We're down to our last minute and a half, and I wanted to get Ali some final words here. I mean, and especially, where do you see anything changing? If it's going to be continuity within Iran, will anything change as far as foreign policy is concerned and relationships with regional neighbors as well as the West?
Well, there's definitely going to be more continuity than change, and that says a lot about the political weight that President Raisi and Foreign Minister Amir Abdollahian had. In fact, this government, I think, the Raisi administration, was in office primarily because it was subservient to the real power holders in Iran, the Supreme Leader and the Revolutionary Guards. I think President Raisi went further than any of his predecessors in discrediting and disempowering the executive branch. And this is because the primary question in Iran is not about the succession of the president, but is about the succession of the supreme leader. And the system did not want to have any surprises. But of course, fate had other plans in mind.
Okay. Ali, that will have to be the final word. I'd like to thank all three of my panelists so much for being with us on this edition of the Newsmakers. Great to have you all. And our viewers, of course, for tuning in as well. Remember, you can follow us on X, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.